Right, so welcome everyone to the panel event, which is titled How to Break into the UX Industry in 2025. I'm Anne with the co-host. I'm joined with Peggy, and today we have a series of panelists. So I'm going to introduce the panelists we have today, starting with Kelly. She's a founder of Pinker Green, and we also are joined by Lauren Higa, a UX designer at Amazon Ads. Third, we have Jason from Atlassian. Fourth, we have Isaac from the MIT Lincoln Laboratory. And lastly, we have Nia from The Atlantic. Today's panel will mostly be based on what the participants are interested in learning more about the UX industry, and will prioritize any questions which the Catalyst participants may have for the panelists. So in the chat or verbally, you guys could feel free to ask any questions. If not, we also have some more general questions we could start off with. As a quick intro, any panelists, if you guys would like to share, how did you break into UI UX design and what key lessons did you learn?
I guess I can start. Hello,
Okay.
everyone. I'm Jason. I'm currently a UX researcher at Atlassian. I graduated from Boston University in May 2023, with a bachelor's in human physiology. So originally I was pre-med, but I made a transition into the UX industry. So I feel like I've experience in like how to break into this field a little bit. But um, one of the things that I did a lot when I was first making the transition was focusing on how my past experiences can be relevant to the UX industry. So just as an example, I did a lot of things such as clinical research during my time at undergrad, and that has a lot of applications in UX research as well. For example, recruiting participants, creating surveys, analyzing data results are all key responsibilities as a UX researcher. So I was able to highlight these skills when I like on my resume and on job applications. And as a result of that, it made the transition really seamless, even though I didn't have a lot of direct experience in UX. But yeah, so after I graduated, I worked at TD Bank as a design researcher, which is their fancy way of saying UX researcher, essentially. And now I am at Atlassian. And the key lesson for me that I learned was not to not like be afraid of your past experiences and really utilize what you've learned and how you can like bring your skills into a new area.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. To any other panelists? Yeah, Nia?
Hey everyone, my name is Naya. I'm a senior product designer at The Atlantic. I started in a completely unrelated field. I went like in undergrad, I studied international affairs. I wanted to like work in embassies. And then I discovered UX design just from talking to people. And long story short, I kind of like took a leap of faith and quit my job and did a UX boot camp. The reason I did that was because I just felt like I didn't have enough information to know whether I wanted to pursue a graduate degree in it. And I felt like a boot camp was like an easier way for me to figure that out without investing a lot financially and time-wise. And yeah, it ended up being like as close to a perfect career as I can imagine. So I started my career at National Geographic Society, and I was working with explorers who are grantees, who like go out into the field and conduct research. And yeah, I remember going back to lessons. I remember coming out of a boot camp worrying that I had too many gaps in knowledge. Like I would be expected to know much more than I really needed to when I started my first job. But one thing I've realized over time, working at National Geographic and now The Atlantic, is that there's like each company is different. The way they work, even like some of the terminology that's used, there are a lot of like company specific words and processes and things like that that like you'll never be able to know, you won't be expected to know. So if that is a concern for especially people who are graduating, like you'll learn a lot of what you need to on the job once you get there.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I'm catching. Oh, sorry, Lauren. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go. Awesome. Hi everyone. My name is Lauren and I'm a UX designer at Amazon. Um, and prior to Amazon, I was also doing UX at Shake Shack based here in New York. Like Jason, I also graduated in 2023. I attended Parsons and got my BFA in design and technology. But throughout college, I didn't always know I wanted to do UX design. And it wasn't until I had tried different internships in areas such as like digital marketing or graphic design, where I found out about UX and started thinking this could be the ideal career path for me. And through those internships, I was eventually able to break into more UX internships and then leverage those when finding a full-time job. But I think even jumping from maybe like earlier roles that were not super relevant into UX, I think a key lesson that I learned that definitely helped was being able to create your own opportunities. So this could mean like applying to different startups, or if there's like friends or family who are like starting up their own like sites or businesses that may need some like UX support. Or even if you are in like a role where maybe it's adjacent to UX but not directly in it, finding ways throughout your job to create your own case studies that you can then use later on.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Lauren.
I can jump in. Excuse me. My name is Isaac. I am a UI UX engineer at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Similar to some of the other respondents, it's interesting to catch a theme there. My educational background, undergrad, was marketing and business entrepreneurship. So very much, like adjacent, but not quite. Human factors, not quite UX. So there definitely is a pivot there. And I am fortunate that my first job out of undergrad was at a consultancy, and I do feel like they took a chance on me in the sense that they saw somebody who was motivated and who was passionate, but obviously lacked, some of those technical skills around the work that we do. But they actually had an interesting model, this agency. They liked to bring in graphic designers or marketers or, people in similar fields and kind of cultivate their knowledge in UX at that role. And it benefited them because, they're teaching you their work processes and their mindset around UX, and you kind of get that nice output of the training. So I lucked out in that sense, but I think what I learned from that experience, one, working for an agency where you're touching a bunch of different products and industries, I was able to find where I felt passionate about if there is an industry that calls to you. So that was really helpful. And just again, being able to like be cultivated in an environment that was encouraging learning. And to Naya's point, like not going into a job expecting that they expect you to know everything. They want to help you understand and also help train you in some cases. So part luck, part also my effort getting in the door, but it was a wonderful experience, and I keep a lot of that with me as I move on. So thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing, Isaac. I think all five, you guys have introduced yourselves, which is great. We're gonna open it up to the participants. If anyone here has a question, feel free to add it to the chat. Oh yes, Ryan, do you have a question for the panelists?
Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing their experience. I'm very curious about how AI is impacting your work. How are you integrating into your workflow and your daily life as a UX designer?
For me, it sort of is my work right now. So I don't know if that's the lens you're like looking for, but So at The Atlantic, which is a magazine, right now we just launched this product called The Atlantic Labs, which is more of a incubator. It's for the product team, by the product team, and it's where we test out different features, products, experiments, things like that. So AI is a really big part of experimentation right now. I think all of our experiments use AI in some capacity. And yeah, just like showing people around the organization and also the public like how you can use AI and outside of just like ChatGPT. So, for example, we have AI internal tools that help staff like navigate. I mean, The Atlantic, it has over 100 years worth of journalism, and that has to be curated. We create thematic content. There are lots of different events happening all the time that we may want to like pull certain content for. So like it's a lot faster using AI tools to help sort of like uh, parse through all of that information. We're interested in seeing how we can use it for education, for example. Like, can you create educational content from journalism? AI is also able to help us with that. And a lot of it has to do with just like explaining AI to the public because I think information is just pretty limited right now, especially when it comes to like I've noticed even with Chat GPT, for example, like a big part of the UX side of my job is like, how do you like you can create a product that's a chat, but like how do you teach people how to ask the right questions in the right structure so that they get the answers that they're actually looking for?
Yeah, very similar in my company as well. We are, I can't say too much about it, but we are currently developing an internal AI tool, and my the role as a UX researcher is currently testing it with our internal employees and seeing like how that, like what adjustments can be made that would better tailor like how we can make that AI tool better and help our employees more. But with like using AI in everyday work, for me, I use it a lot in generative research. As a researcher, I have to go through a lot of like articles and past studies about understanding like human behavior and things like that. So AI really has been helpful in kind of allowing me to quickly look at these past researches, getting summaries about them instead of me having to like comb through different databases. So yeah, just to answer your question, Ryan, I think AI, like we're using it very like adjacent to our work rather than I think people have this fear of like, oh, AI is going to take over our work, but it's more so like we're utilizing it to make ourselves more efficient in what we do.
So next, I think Jason, similar to like what you had mentioned, when I interact with AI during like my work, it's mostly been from the lens of using a lot of like the internal tools. Although sometimes like in my design work, I have occasionally encountered situations where we are incorporating AI interfaces for different advertisers. But in terms of how I use it on my day to day, a lot of times I'll use it to synthesize a lot of documents because I think Amazon in particular is a very like doc and writing heavy culture. So a lot of times in terms of understanding like different business requirements, or maybe you're encountering a lot of different projects and we have some overlap, I found AI to be a great tool to help synthesize that in a short amount of time and really pull apart maybe some like similarities or like differences or high level information. And then also in terms of how it informs my design process, I found it really helpful in terms of synthesizing large amounts of qualitative data from like user interviews, or if there's different like ad hoc feedback from customers. It allows me to like save a lot of time to really use those to then like maybe inform conversations I'm having with like different product managers or engineers. But definitely it's still like there's still like a bit of like a learning curve, and it's still like new to my team and the org that I'm in. Um, and then in terms of like designing AI tools, I think it also is something, one interesting aspect of it has been putting more like disclosure whether like some tools are generating like AI content and what are some things to keep in mind, and making sure that whoever's interacting with it understands that the source of what they're being generated might not always be like 100% correct, but to set certain expectations in mind as they use these tools.
That's great. Thank you so much. Hopefully, Ryan, that answers your question. Jaden, I believe you do have a follow-up for Lauren, if you want to add on about prior graphic design experience that helped land an internship, or especially if you're unsure about going into your career. Lauren, do you have anything to add on? Any tips and advice about that?
Yeah, I think to the question of having any prior graphic design experience or relative experience, I think one example I can use is one of my early internships in college was doing digital content work for an automotive company based in my hometown. And at the time, it was really small. They were really lean, trying to like build up their digital experience team. So the media team I worked on was under the same group as like product and like UX. So it was great because I feel like through that, I got to talk directly with the UX designers and learn a bit more about what they did at their job and what UX related projects they did for the specific company. And then some things that were really helpful was that company in particular also had hackathons. I think there were maybe 2 during my time as an intern. So that was really helpful in the sense that I was also able to bring some of like the work I was doing on the digital content side, so having access to a lot of like site analytics, click data, information like that, while also taking on the role as like a UX designer within these like hackathon sessions. So I eventually used experiences like that for case studies for more UX focused internships. And I thought that was a good segue where even though the intern role I was hired for wasn't directly UX, still finding those opportunities, like I had mentioned, to break into it. And let's see. And I think also in terms of maybe exploring different internships or like different areas, I felt like that was really helpful early on in college in terms of identifying what a good career path might be. Because I think getting a sense of, what is it like actually doing a particular type of job in like a company setting, I feel like it's a good way to really like sample and get a broader idea of what you're going into before maybe you fully commit. So hopefully that answered your question, Jaden.
If any of the other panelists have any tips and tricks about landing UX internships, I think Kalista mentioned in the chat also would like to receive more tips about this. So if any other panelists would like to share, please feel free to.
I'll just make a time-tested plug for things like career fairs. I hear, or most, if not all of you, I believe, are students. So anything that is facilitated around, specific events to meet other employers and just kind of putting yourself out there. I know it's a little bit difficult socially, and definitely coming off the pandemic, some of those interactions are more awkward, but people are really impressed when you come up in person and kind of give them your spiel, talk about what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, get to know them, and that putting that face to it, I think, is extremely important, especially in a industry where there are so many applicants applying to things. Really getting yourself out there in that sense. That's also a plug for making connections and networking. And I think to Lauren's point, things about like design-a-thons, kind of wrapping this into the point of also how to get UX experience if you're not able to get an internship or if you're not quite there yet. I'm a big fan of like doing a volunteer opportunity. If you want to do like one pro bono project, if you can afford the time for that, like picking a nonprofit organization and designing a project around redesigning something for them or doing a research project, whether you just do it on the side or actually involve them. You can design your own project outside of school things, but also plugging different, like I said, design-a-thons, hackathons, just to get some work pieces in your portfolio together. That'd be my quick tip on that.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm not a UX designer, but I'm a business owner. And so we do get, you know, quite a few applicants and look at a lot of portfolios. And just last week, actually, you know, we do a lot of informational interviews even when we're not hiring, which I think is something to put out there. We've had plenty of people say like, listen, I know I didn't see anything on your site. But would you take the time to, you know, talk with me for 30 minutes just so I can pick your brain and maybe you can give me some feedback on my portfolio? And to Isaac and Lauren's point, sort of the fake it till you make it, right? Like if that opportunity hasn't come to you yet, make it and create your own work. Or if it's a student project that maybe isn't as robust as it could be, make it robust. Like you've gotten one piece of an assignment, but flesh it out. I mean, we still do that. I've had my business for over 20 years. Like there's still stuff on our site that we're like, God, if they had only hired us to do X, Y, and Z. So we do it. And then it looks like this much more robust piece of work and is a better sell, you know, when you just kind of like fill it out. So totally different perspective than these absolute experts here. This is definitely not my area of expertise, but as someone who's a hiring person, that is definitely something that we look for. Also, you know, it sounds like a lot of the panelists have come from different backgrounds before they got into UX. I think that is something that we look for, is somebody who's a little bit diverse in their skill set. So, you know, I remember the most recent designer that we hired who came from BU last year. You know, she had like some like sprinklings of stuff in there that we were like, oh, she's going to be a great web designer. She didn't have a ton of it yet in her portfolio, but she had just sort of like little bits in there. She had done an app, she had done again, she's a designer, so not a UX. She's a graphic designer, not a UX designer. But we knew based on what she had done that we could start to do that sort of on the job training that you guys were just talking about. Like, yeah, you see it, some aptitude for one thing. I can see that and like get somebody in, and then we can start further, you know, further developing their skill set on the job. So definitely like fill it out, get outside of the assignment and make it yours. And I think it goes a long way.
One of my favorite lines that always keeps me going and motivated is, the worst they can say is no. And that is so true. So I always ask.
Yes.
Be implored to ask.
I mean, all the time, Isaac, I say that the worst that somebody can say is no. And truly that, and I've gotten a lot of no's. But yeah, I think that's great advice, Isaac.
Yeah, adding on to like all of these great points, one thing I did a lot when I first made the transition was I literally went on LinkedIn and reached out to a ton of people who are more experienced in the UX industry and just asked them questions like, hello, can you review my portfolio, or can you give me tips on like how did you land your role in the company that you're currently at? I know a lot of people, when they do utilize LinkedIn, they kind of jump straight into like, oh, like, can I get a referral for your company? But my goal was to get advice on how I can improve my own work first before I actually go into that. So I asked for a lot of feedback on things like my resume, my portfolio, and I actually also did a portfolio presentation to a senior product designer before I applied to jobs. So just reaching out to people who have like this knowledge that would benefit you. And once you're like able to get all of that knowledge and build up your portfolio and your resume, um, you'll be in a lot better position when you do apply to internships. And actually, Kelly, I have a question for you because you mentioned you like review a lot of portfolios. I was just wondering, you know, like I think this will help our audience as well. Like, what are some things that will help make a portfolio stand out to you, like when you are reviewing it?
So that's a great question, Jason. And I think that a lot of the student portfolios that we see, it sort of speaks to what I was just talking about, where there's sort of like a lot of things, but nothing feels very robust. It's sort of like, oh, here's a spread I did for a magazine from Graphic Design 1, or here's like here's 3 screens from an app that I designed. So I think what stands out for us is when there's fewer things that feel fleshed out. We just looked at one. She actually graduated from BU with a master's in graphic design, I think last year. And you know, I got to her site and there was probably 30 projects, and you don't know where to look. So do some curating, I think, And that is really helpful because, you see a lot of the stuff, you only have somebody for so many minutes before they move right along. So do some of your own curating, I think, of your work and really show the stuff that you feel very passionate about. I think that, becoming sort of your own specialist in a way is really helpful, like having your own point of view. So for me, that's what it is, Jason, is like lesser, better work rather than like everything you've done in school. It's like really saying like, God, I love that. I love that spread. What if I did the whole magazine? Or what if I did the app that went with that magazine or the website? So really just sort of, or what if I rebranded the whole, make it, again, it is, I get that it's your own time and it's above and beyond what's required for the work, but we just get into that and we're like, God, I mean, look how robust this is. Look how full it feels. That's the stuff that we really do look for rather than like 60 different projects that you did over the past 4 years. It's like, show me 5 good ones, and then we see your aptitude for a lot of things.
Awesome. Yeah, those are some great advice. I know we had a few questions about like how people can stand out in this competitive market. And yeah, like one thing definitely to do is to make your portfolio represent who you are as a designer. If you are like a product designer or researcher, like really emphasize, who you are, what is it that you want to showcase. For example, for me, I did a lot of projects related to improving healthcare designs like electronic medical record systems. And so there's like a theme within my portfolio. So I guess one piece of advice for you guys is to really like take time to think about what projects you want to showcase to potential recruiters, to whoever looks at your portfolio, and just put that element of yourself in it. And then that will make it stand out a lot.
Completely agree.
There was also a question about the number of projects to include in a portfolio. I know you guys mentioned about quality and quantity, but if you were to give like a more numerical like estimate, any suggestions for the participants?
I mean, I can speak to what I had on my portfolio when I first got my job. I will say, like, I came out of a boot camp and I had some unrelated work experience before that. But because I had only done a boot camp, I had, I think, about 3 projects on my portfolio, which I'm not saying I recommend having only 3, but it was enough in that situation. And I think the reason, and they were all speculative projects. So I'm in grad school right now, and there are people who are trying to get jobs in UX, and I see they're very worried because they feel like they don't have enough real world projects. And I think a lot of the answers to the questions I hear is like, it depends. But I think that if you can take an app that you use, but you've noticed like I don't know, some issues, and you've like taken the initiative to like do research on it, even if it's like with your friends, just to figure out like, okay, what are some like problems with this app that I can solve through design? Like it doesn't need to be a real client or anything for you to show that you have the skills and like what it takes to actually do it for real. So I think that I, I think however many projects you have where you feel like you can like show those skills is like the right number. But also it's important to think about when you are in an interview, employers will ask you like, oh, can you walk me through, I don't know, a case study, but that may happen like sequentially. Like you may have 2 or 3 rounds of interviews where you're being asked to walk through a case study. So it also kind of helps you if you do have a bit more variety, especially if you feel like there's a certain area of interest that they have, like having diversity, which like the other speakers have mentioned is really helpful in that case, just like for like putting your best foot forward.
I would just +1 to Naya's comment about that relative amount. I also come, just to add context, from like defense work, and a lot of that is sensitive information. So I've actually had quite an interesting time trying to present on portfolio pieces because I can show very little. I can talk about what I did, and I can, use vague terms and show some like conceptual graphs and graphics, but I have my own like fun memories of portfolio stuff. But anyway, when I did my most recent interview, I came with three, and I came with three that were definitely diverse. I wanted to show some work I had on design systems and like building out infrastructure, and then like one purely design, actual interface work, UI work, and then one that was more of like structural organizational design. So I came with the diverse pieces. We maybe talked through two of the three. I don't think we got through all of them, but I had ones that I was more excited to talk about, and they kind of let me guide it, and I think yeah, having that diversity really just helps you cater to the interview. So just plus one to all that, I think that's great.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I think we have a question from the participant. It's for Jason. And you mentioned that portfolio presentations. Can you speak about how you structure those?
Yeah, totally. So I guess there's like two parts to this, which is like the interview process. So it really depends on the company, I would say, but to give like a very general answer to the process, most of the time after you get past, for example, like the recruiter call, you'll have to go into a portfolio presentation. For me, I've picked out all of the ones I've done. I've done 1 to 2 case studies, 2 being the max, because as we've mentioned, again, other panelists have mentioned, it's really about the quality over the quantity. And during this presentation, you can either just open your portfolio and walk through it, but I like to make a separate slide deck and really go in depth into like my design process and just showcase that a lot more and make it more succinct. So during these presentations, I'll talk about like doing my initial research, like what is this project about, like what is my role in it, what are some outcomes. So really it's just taking your portfolio and kind of verbalizing it to an audience. And that's why we kind of kept saying like you need to focus on like the quality over the quantity, because let's say you pick a project that you weren't super passionate about and you kind of just put it on your portfolio to reach that quota of like 5 projects. And if you do talk about that project in that presentation, it's pretty clear to the whoever your audience is that you weren't involved heavily in this project, and your results may not be as impactful as you want it to be, and you may not have gone as in depth as you can into like the research process or the design process. So for all of these presentations, really, I think like most of them have been one where I like spend about 20 to 30 minutes on and just really highlight my entire process. And at the end, of course, there's like a Q&A section where whoever the panelist is will ask you questions about, like, for example, what made you decide to design it this way instead of another way? So kind of picking apart your design decisions. But yeah, once you pass that part, there's usually like a technical part where you create a design in a given time frame. So just moving on to other parts of the interview process. And then there's like also behavioral interview. And I think that's pretty common if other people want to jump in with how their interview process look like. But yeah, that's essentially how mine went. It was like recruiter, portfolio presentation, then a technical round, and then like a last behavioral interview.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Jason. I think too, what you had mentioned about the portfolio presentations, some advice that I've heard and have tried to implement when doing a case study presentation is to also structure your case studies as like a story and like a narrative. So something along the lines of like, what was like the ask or like problem, then delving into like maybe what was some like research that you had done, what were some like explorations, like what did that design process look like? And then as you get towards the tail end where you talk about your solution, also making sure at the very end to try and consider, if you had more time, or like if there weren't certain like limitations involved, what would you have done differently? Because I feel like that's something where definitely when you get questions asked towards the end, that one has consistently come up many times. So always great to think about. And then also in terms of like what case studies to choose, I feel like personally, the more recent the case study was, like the closer you are to like the work, and you're able to like recall more of the details and where your mind was at when you made certain decisions, versus maybe a case study that was like a lot older, where maybe forgotten some parts. Just wanted to add on there.
Lauren, I always ask that question. Like, if you had had more time, well, what else would you have done in this? So I think you're right. Let's definitely be prepared in that for that one.
Kelly, I'm curious if this would stand out to you. One thing that I have learned in talking about my work from when I came on with my first job, one of the things that stood out in my interview, so my boss had told me, was the fact that I said we instead of I for a lot of the work that I talked about. Some of the work was myself, some of it was as part of a team. So I wanted to give credit to the fact that it was not just a solo act in that case. And that was more of a cultural fit. He wanted people who were humble and who were willing to give credit to everybody who was involved. But that stood out to him, and it checked that box of like, okay, Isaac would be a good cultural fit. So that's very niche, but I just think if you can act with humility, that may be looked at positively by a recruiter, especially if that's a priority of the company's culture. But Kelly, does that ever stand
Yes,
out to you?
I
Is that
love
something
it.
you live for?
I love it so much. Like, listen, I mean, my team is so harmonious in that way that it is everyone's complimenting each other. I did this with her. I did this with her. I mean, even for me, when I speak about it, I own Pink or Green, but it is our company. We are doing the work. I call my employees, my colleagues, like it is such a big part of our culture to have that shared responsibility for everything that leaves our company. So yes, I'm not surprised to hear that that was a huge hit for you in an interview, because it is a big, and I mean, I have a very small company, but I think it's becoming more and more common to have that, that sort of teamwork, that spirit, because as you know, like nothing gets done on your own anymore. So that was very smart of you, Isaac. And yes, I do look out for that for sure. Because especially in school,
Well,
everything's a team project now. So
yeah.
Those are some great points with the idea of like teamwork and I remember in my presentations, I have one slide dedicated to like the team that I've worked on and what each of our roles were, because part of it is like, yes, to emphasize that we're working on a team, but you also have to really showcase what you did on the team and like what your impact was. So I remember the first presentation I did, I said we a lot, and then the person interviewing me was like, what did you specifically do? So then I had to kind of reorient myself and say, oh, like I did X, Y, and Z on the project rather than being like very vague. Yeah.
that's a great counterpoint.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love how you guys like start a whole conversation building off each other. Just to transition on to another question, we have a question about experience regarding whiteboard interview. Does anyone have any tips regarding that?
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So for my first job at Nat Geo, there was a whiteboarding interview. Basically, after doing a few rounds of interviews, they sort of it is what it sounds like, like they put you in a room with a whiteboard. Although I know, especially since COVID, some of this is transitioned more to like digital presentations where you have like more time. But I came in pre-pandemic. So I had, I think, 15 minutes to sort of sit with a prompt that they gave me. And then I had to present it in 15 minutes. I remember for my whiteboard challenge, it was related to education. And actually, it feels very relevant in the setting, but it was along the lines of how would you basically welcome students, how would you like welcome them or orient them when they are first starting at a university? So it's like very open question. I have been a student, so I felt like although I'm not the user, and you know, you hear that a lot in UX, I remember my own experiences, and I feel like that, like with whiteboard challenges, just trying to like really put yourself, first of all, identifying who your users are, and then seeing if there is any connection, like, you know, so I was like, well, okay, for example, like there might be like student. What is a student? Are these undergrad students? Are they grad students? Are they transfer students? Are they like first years? Like there are all kinds of students. So I feel like I focused my whiteboard challenge more so on research because like I was very interested in the UX, not as much the UI, but I was like, like what would the information architecture look like if this was, say, an app? So like I focus very much in that realm of like what would my research goals be for this if I were to actually be building a platform for this. But it's interesting, a few years later, we used the same whiteboard challenge with someone who was incoming, and she tackled it in a completely different way. Like she went like hardcore with like the UI, and it was like really, really amazing to see. And like we approached the problem very differently, but like I think they were both extremely, you know, valuable, and like she brought so much to the table with her design. So it was also very nice to see something visual. So I feel like with whiteboard challenges, it can feel like there's a solution that the team may have in mind and they're testing you to see like how closely you can get to what they're thinking. But I don't think that's the case. I think they're looking to see, you know, like how creatively you can approach the problem, like where your head is at, how your brain works, and what questions you ask. So yeah, hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Yeah, I think for my whiteboarding experience as well, I very similarly, I focused on the research part a lot more than the design. I think one thing everyone should keep in mind is that they're not looking for a perfect product or solution at the end, but they're more so, they really want to see what your thought process is like when you're arriving at that solution. So I tend to ask a lot of questions if you are able to ask questions, because I've done some where they're like no speaking. But if you can ask questions, really take the opportunity to ask questions to your interviewer and kind of walk them through, you know, like what you're thinking. I ask questions like, who are the potential users? What resource do we have currently that we can, you know, use to build this potential product? What research has been done in the past by the company? So things like that when you're asking the interviewer, like don't be afraid to interact with whoever is there. Um, and then when you do create the design at the end, when you present it, really again, kind of tell it in a story where you arrived at this solution because I did X, Y, and Z research. So this was my user group. This is the problem that they're facing. And from the research, you know, this is a potential solution that would address that problem for them. Is kind of how I structured these interviews, or like, yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. And we have another question from the participant. What's one thing that has surprised you about design field and one thing you wish you knew?
So I think sort of back to our earlier discussion on, you know, when you're walking through like a case study and you mentioned like we versus like I, but they're having that implication that a lot of the work that you do is usually a team effort of some sort. Even if you're in a situation where you're a solo designer, you're usually working with like, you know, product managers or engineers when it comes to actually building the feature or like the end product. And I think one thing that surprised me about the field was just like how collaborative it is like on the day to day. Even though I work with an immediate design team and we have design reviews, a lot of the projects that I do work on, I'm mostly interacting with different product managers and then like having discussions with like engineering when it comes to like scoping the level of work that we're doing. And I think it's really helpful too, since, you know, some of these like product partners have a lot of different viewpoints that they bring to the table. And knowing how to effectively communicate your design decisions and your thought process, I feel is so important when you're in that collaborative environment.
Yeah, adding on to like the collaborative environment aspect, I think one thing that surprised me was how much presentations there would be. I think going into the field at first, I was like, oh yeah, you're just like designing these screens and like shipping it. But no, like you have to present your work, whether it's like a lo-fi or like, one of your prototypes or a draft of it, like every step of the way. I remember like one time every week I have meetings where I have to present a certain design and how I've iterated that over the course of like a few weeks. So just getting used to talking with people and also getting used to feedback. I know a lot of people are not used to like getting critiques on their work, or it might be hard for some people, but take those with a grain of salt because at the end you guys are all working on this product. All the feedback is not against you, it's on the like whatever you're designing. So I think yeah, like that surprised me a lot because I was not used to presentations and I really had to like know how to put together PowerPoints, how to present it to like engineers, stakeholders, and whatever other collaborative team that I'm working with and getting feedback from them and putting that into my work. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. I believe we have enough time to answer one more question, which Jaden put in the chat. He wants to know more about, like, if a recruiter were to ask about why you want to work at a particular company, if there are more unique questions to ask the recruiters at the end of the interview. Um, and you guys panelists, if you could share maybe it's an insight into what your day in life looks like in designer and how that could link to making when sharing about how you would want to work at a company and how that would be more unique. Hopefully that makes sense. But if panelists, you guys could share.
I have two, and I would say it kind of depends on if we're saying like recruiter, meaning the first call you're having with somebody, or if it's somebody who's maybe a bit more invested in the day to day. Those are where my questions come in. So if that's off of the point, I apologize. But I would say two that I've enjoyed asking are, it might be kind of similar, but what makes somebody successful in this role? And then I think just to your question, Anne, about like what does the day to day look like? And then maybe a third is where are some of the current needs that the team is having so that I'm coming in already understanding like what are they actively trying to work on that is maybe not getting enough motivation right now, or based on what their needs are, or any of those things, skills that I have or that I could bring and be excited about trying to lead when I join the team. Just kind of understanding where the gaps are and how I can, if I can, plug in on day one, getting in the door. So, but again, that's maybe a little bit further in the pipeline of talking to somebody who's actually on the UX team or is managing the team or whatever. But hope that helps for later in the pipeline.
Yeah,
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Isaac, like what you said resonated so much. I feel like a question I ask is like, what does this team need to work on? I think it's really important not only to know about, the good things about the culture and the day to day, but also like what maybe isn't working so well or what are some things that the team would like to improve on. And it doesn't have to sound negative or, but I think that's the reality of taking a job is like things may feel very glamorous and exciting during the interview, even maybe like the first few months of the job, but then you start to really uncover like what gaps there are. So I think, especially when you get to the point of speaking directly to people on the team, really leaning into what their experiences have been and what they think, like how they think that the team could get better. And I think recruiters tend to know a bit about that as well.
Also jumping into plus one, like Isaac and Naya as well, in terms of asking the team, and also this is probably later down the line when you're talking to like a hiring manager or different people on the team that you're interviewing with about like where the gaps are, and also what are some areas that the team or like organization could improve on or is looking to improve over the year. I think also in terms of a fun question, maybe for like the hiring manager that I've asked in the past is what is one aspect of the job that like you can't teach? And it's definitely yielded some like very interesting answers. I know one that I had got was you can't teach someone how to care. You can teach them how to do the ins and outs of the job, but in terms of, you know, how they're going to go about doing things and how they interact with like others, that's something that's really up to the person. But yeah.
Yeah, like for me, this is definitely a question that I asked like later down the line as well. As a UX researcher, what I asked is what are some tools or methodologies that you guys use specific to your company? Because I know there are like differences as you go between companies. So I'm really like interested in how like this particular company and this particular team functions when they do work on a project. And you also, for me, I also like this idea of like you're also interviewing them and seeing, you know, like is their workflow like is that something that interests you? Like is that something you want to be a part of? Do you, and also allows me to gauge myself. I'm like, do I have experience with the tools that they use? And you know, do I have experience and can I contribute to their current workflow and like how well I can, if I do start, like how well can I jump right in on the team?
There's a reason you're all gainfully employed because these are excellent questions. And I would say at any interview, if people were asking questions like these, I mean, it means so much. We don't use a recruiter at Pink or Green, but to have those sort of like really, you know, both interesting questions, but also like you said, they're kind of serving yourself a little too. Like, am I going to be like the answers to these will help determine if you'll be a good fit there too. So I think, yeah, there's a reason you guys all have great jobs. Take this advice.
Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing. Hopefully participants would answer all of your questions. We appreciate your tips and advice so much. Just like Jaden just mentioned, thank you so much for your insight. And I think we're going to start wrapping up the panel. So once again, thank you all panelists for joining us today in our Catalyst UI UX panel event. And as Isaac mentioned, participants feel free to reach out to everyone. You can find their contacts in your participants guide, I believe. Otherwise, we'll make sure to provide information. And yeah, panelists, feel free to drop any information or resources in the chat for participants, and the Forge team can also share them with everyone else who didn't join today's panel event.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It was
Thank
fun.
you guys.
Thank you so much.
Good
Thank
luck
you.
with everything.